The October wind carries the scent of dying leaves and damp earth across the Hudson Valley this evening, as the last rays of autumn sunlight pierce through the skeletal branches of ancient oaks. The temperature drops sharply as darkness approaches, 48 degrees and falling, while fog begins its nightly crawl up from the river below. This is the hour when Ravens Hollow Mansion seems most alive, or perhaps most haunted, its 127 windows glowing amber in the twilight, like the eyes of some massive, patient predator. Chapter 1. The Paradox of Grandeur. Ravens Hollow Mansion stands as a monument to both American ambition and American tragedy, its limestone facade rising 165 feet above the Hudson River Valley like a Gothic accusation against the sky. Built between 1887 and 1893 by railroad magnate Cornelius Blackwood, the estate originally sprawled across 3,800 acres of prime New York countryside, encompassing forests, farmland, and 3 separate villages whose residents paid rent directly to the Blackwood family coffers. The mansion itself contains 147 rooms, including 42 bedrooms, 27 bathrooms, 18 sitting rooms, a ballroom that could accommodate 500 guests, and a servants' wing that housed up to 85 staff members during the estate's peak years. The construction cost, according to ledgers discovered in the mansion's archives, totaled $4.7 million in 1893 dollars, equivalent to approximately $158 million in today's currency. This figure exceeded even the legendary Biltmore estate's initial budget, though Blackwood insisted on Italian marble imported specifically from the Carrara quarries, the same source that provided stone for Michelangelo's David. The Great Hall's ceiling, painted by French artist Jules-Auguste Montpellier, depicts scenes from American industrial triumph interwoven with classical mythology, a work that alone cost $85,000 and required 14 months to complete. Yet for all its grandeur, Ravens Hollow harbors a darkness that no amount of gilt or crystal can illuminate. The mansion is most famous not for its architectural splendor or its role in America's Gilded Age, but for the night of November 13, 1899, when 7 members of the household staff vanished without explanation, leaving behind only questions that have haunted investigators for over a century. Their disappearance remains one of American history's most perplexing mysteries, made more disturbing by the fact that no bodies were ever recovered, no ransom notes ever delivered, and no credible sightings ever reported. The 7 who vanished included Margaret O'Sullivan, the head housemaid who had served the Blackwood family for 15 years, Thomas Chen, the estate's chief gardener whose botanical innovations had earned recognition from the New York Horticultural Society, James and William Morrison, twin brothers who worked as footmen, Sarah Hoffman, a laundress whose husband would spend the remaining 30 years of his life searching for her, Elena Kowalski, a kitchen maid who had recently announced her engagement, and Marcus Thompson, a stable hand whose diary, discovered decades later, would provide the only contemporary account of strange occurrences at the mansion in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. Contemporary newspaper accounts from the New York Tribune describe the initial investigation as thorough but troubled, with local police joined by Pinkerton detectives hired personally by Cornelius Blackwood. The search involved over 300 volunteers who combed every inch of the estate's grounds, dragged the nearby lake, and explored the mansion's extensive network of service tunnels and sub-basements. They found nothing. Not a single piece of clothing, not a drop of blood, not even a sign of struggle. It was, as lead investigator Robert Halloway wrote in his official report, as if the earth had simply opened and swallowed them whole. The effect on the remaining staff was immediate and profound. Within 2 weeks of the disappearance, 38 servants had given notice, many refusing even to work out their contracted terms. Those who stayed reported hearing footsteps in empty corridors, doors opening and closing of their own accord, and whispered conversations in rooms that investigation proved empty. The butler, Charles Ashworth, a man who had served in English manor houses for 40 years before coming to America, resigned after what he described in a letter to his sister as an encounter that has shaken my understanding of the natural world. Cornelius Blackwood himself, a man who had built his fortune on the backs of 40,000 railroad workers and who had faced down union organizers with hired guns, found himself powerless against the growing reputation of his home as cursed ground. He hired mediums and spiritualists, offering rewards of up to $10,000 for information about the missing servants. He commissioned 3 separate architectural surveys of the mansion, convinced that some hidden room or forgotten passage might hold the answer. He even, according to family correspondence, considered having the entire mansion demolished and rebuilt, believing that the very stones might somehow be contaminated with malevolent force. The mansion today stands as a museum, drawing nearly 450,000 visitors annually who come seeking both historical education and paranormal thrills. Modern ghost hunters have documented over 3,000 alleged supernatural incidents within its walls, including electronic voice phenomena, unexplained temperature drops of up to 20 degrees in specific rooms, and photographs showing anomalous figures in period dress. The mansion's current director, Dr. Elizabeth Hartley, maintains a carefully neutral stance on these claims, noting that Ravenshallow's true horror lies not in ghost stories, but in what it represents about American inequality and the human cost of Gilded Age excess. Chapter 2. Empire's Foundation. Cornelius Blackwood's rise from poverty to becoming one of America's 12 richest men reads like a Horatio Alger story written in blood and steel. Born in 1842 in a Manhattan tenement to Irish immigrants who had fled the potato famine, young Cornelius started working at age 8, selling newspapers on Wall Street corners for 2 cents profit per dozen papers. By 14, he had talked his way into a position as a telegraph operator for the New York Central Railroad, where his quick mind and absolute lack of moral hesitation caught the attention of executives who valued such qualities in the cutthroat world of railroad expansion. Historical records from the period indicate that Blackwood's fortune truly began during the Civil War, when he recognized that military contracts for rail transportation would create unprecedented opportunities. Using insider knowledge gained from his position, he invested his entire savings of $3,000 in railroad stocks just days before major government contracts were announced. This initial investment grew to $75,000 by war's end, providing the seed capital for his entry into the railroad business itself. His methods, typical of the era's robber barons, included stock manipulation, bribery of state legislators, and the systematic destruction of competing lines through rate wars that drove smaller operators into bankruptcy. The Blackwood Railroad Empire, formally incorporated in 1871, eventually controlled over 18,000 miles of track across 12 states, connecting eastern manufacturing centers with western agricultural regions and southern cotton fields. The company employed 42,000 workers at its peak, though working conditions were notoriously brutal. Company records, subpoenaed during later antitrust proceedings, revealed that between 1871 and 1895, over 1,200 workers died in accidents on Blackwood rails, a figure that exceeded industry averages by 30%. Blackwood's response to safety concerns, quoted in the Congressional Record of 1888, was characteristic. Men who fear death should not seek employment in endeavors that build nations. The specific fortune that would build Ravenshollow came from Blackwood's most audacious scheme, the Western Pacific Extension of 1884. Convincing investors that he could build a rail line through the Sierra Nevada using a revolutionary new blasting technique, Blackwood collected $15 million in capital. The line was indeed built, though not through the mountains but around them, adding 400 miles to the proposed route. By the time investors discovered the deception, Blackwood had used financial manipulations to gain controlling interest in their companies as well, essentially stealing from his own partners while maintaining perfect legal standing. The human cost of Blackwood's empire extended beyond workplace casualties. The Western Pacific extension required the displacement of 3 Native American tribes, accomplished through a combination of federal military force and private security firms employed by Blackwood. The construction itself relied heavily on Chinese immigrant labor, with workers paid $1.25 per day compared to the $3 paid to white workers doing identical jobs. Living conditions in the railroad camps were described by contemporary reformer Helen Hunt Jackson as incompatible with basic human dignity, with workers housed in tents during winter months and provided with contaminated water that led to multiple cholera outbreaks. Archive evidence suggests that Blackwood's decision to build Ravens Hollow was motivated not by a desire for a country retreat, but by a need to establish social credibility among New York's established elite, who still viewed him as an Irish upstart despite his vast wealth. The location was chosen specifically for its proximity to the estates of the Astors, Vanderbilts, and Roosevelts, families whose acceptance Blackwood craved even as he privately derided them as soft-handed inheritors who wouldn't last a day building actual wealth. The land for Ravens Hollow itself was acquired through methods that exemplified Blackwood's approach to business. The original 3,800 acres belonged to 17 different farming families, some of whom had worked the land since the Dutch colonial period. Blackwood first manipulated shipping rates to make it impossible for these farmers to profitably transport their goods to market. As they struggled financially, he offered loans at reasonable rates through a front company. When farmers inevitably defaulted during the Panic of 1884, which Blackwood had helped engineer through stock manipulation, he foreclosed simultaneously on all 17 properties. 3 families who attempted to resist eviction were removed by Pinkerton agents. One farmer, Jacob Vanderberg, died of injuries sustained during his forced removal, though the coroner ruled the death accidental. Contemporary accounts describe Blackwood as a man of striking contradictions. Standing 6 feet 3 inches tall in an era when the average American man was 5 feet 7 inches, he commanded attention in any room. His personal habits were austere. He neither drank nor smoked and was known to work 18-hour days. Yet he insisted on surrounding himself with opulence that bordered on the obscene. His personal railroad car, which cost $175,000 to construct, featured a bathroom with gold fixtures and a ceiling painted with cherubs holding elements of the Blackwood family crest, a crest that Blackwood had simply invented, having no actual noble lineage. The announcement of Ravens Hollow's construction in 1887 was met with both admiration and revulsion in New York society. The New York Times described the planned mansion as a testament to American achievement, while Harper's Weekly termed it a monument to greed that would make Nero blush. Blackwood seemed to relish both reactions equally, famously stating at the groundbreaking ceremony that history remembers builders, not critics. In a century, my name will be carved in stone, while theirs are forgotten in dust. Chapter 3. Raising the Walls. The construction of Ravens Hollow Mansion began on March 15, 1887, with a groundbreaking ceremony attended by over 500 invited guests who arrived on a special train commissioned by Blackwood for the occasion. The date was specifically chosen to coincide with the Ides of March, a detail that contemporary observers found either boldly defiant or foolishly tempting of fate. The first shovel of earth was turned using a ceremonial spade with an ivory handle carved from an elephant tusk that Blackwood claimed had been gifted to him by King Leopold II of Belgium, though shipping records suggest he simply purchased it from a Manhattan import dealer for $450. The architect selected for Ravens Hollow was Richard Morris Hunt, the same visionary who would later design the breakers and Biltmore. Hunt's initial designs, preserved in the mansion's archives, called for a structure even more ambitious than what was eventually built, a 200-room palace that would have exceeded any private residence in America. Blackwood allegedly rejected these plans not for their expense, but for their completion timeline, demanding that the mansion be habitable within 4 years so he could host a ball celebrating his 50th birthday in the completed structure. Hunt revised his designs, creating what he privately described in letters to his wife as a compromise between Blackwood's megalomaniacal visions and the limitations of earthly construction. The workforce assembled for Ravens Hollow's construction peaked at 850 men during the summer of 1889, making it one of the largest private construction projects in American history. Following the pattern of similar estates, the workers were organized into specialized teams with rigid hierarchies. Italian stonemasons from Tuscany and Lombardy, 125 in total, were brought over specifically for the project, housed in purpose-built dormitories on the estate grounds. These craftsmen, led by master mason Giuseppe Torelli, were responsible for the mansion's elaborate exterior stonework, including the famous gargoyles that peer down from the roof's cornices, gargoyles whose faces, according to preserved correspondence, were modeled after Blackwood's business rivals and political enemies. Irish laborers comprised the largest segment of the workforce, nearly 400 men who handled the heavy lifting, excavation, and basic construction tasks. These workers, many of whom had previously been employed on Blackwood's railroad projects, were paid $1.50 per day, with 50 cents withheld for room and board in what amounted to little more than converted barns. The working conditions, as documented in a report by the New York State Labor Commission that was subsequently suppressed through Blackwood's political connections, included 16-hour days during summer months, no compensation for injuries, and immediate termination for any worker who attempted to organize collective bargaining. The mansion's foundation required excavation to a depth of 40 feet to reach bedrock, a process that took 8 months and resulted in the first construction fatalities. Historical records from the period indicate that 3 workers died when a retaining wall collapsed during heavy rains in September 1887, their bodies recovered only after 2 days of frantic digging. Blackwood's response was to dock the pay of workers who had participated in the rescue effort for unauthorized work stoppage. A 4th death occurred in January 1888 when a worker fell from scaffolding that investigation revealed had been erected without proper safety measures to save time and cost. The technical challenges of construction were immense. The mansion's Great Hall, with its 60-foot vaulted ceiling, required innovative engineering solutions that pushed the boundaries of 1880s construction technology. Steel beams, a relatively new building material, were incorporated into the structure, delivered by Blackwood's own railroad at prices that competitors claimed constituted illegal monopolistic practice. The mansion's heating system, designed by English engineer Thomas Whitfield, included 65 fireplaces connected to a network of flues that created what Whitfield described as a perfect circulation of warmed air throughout the structure. This system required 18 miles of copper piping and took a team of 30 specialists 6 months to install. Archive evidence suggests that the mansion's most innovative feature was its electrical system, installed in 1891 when electricity was still a novelty in private homes. Blackwood hired directly from Thomas Edison's team, bringing in Chief Engineer William Hammer to oversee the installation of a private power plant on the estate grounds. The system powered 1,200 light bulbs throughout the mansion, making Ravens Hollow one of the first fully electrified private residences in America. The installation process was dangerous, with 2 workers suffering severe electrical burns and another dying from electrocution when proper grounding procedures were ignored to meet Blackwood's aggressive timeline. The importation of materials for Ravenshollow created its own logistics network. Italian marble arrived at New York ports in quantities that required special handling. Over 2,000 tons in total, according to customs records. The famous ballroom floor, composed of marble in 7 different colors arranged in a pattern depicting the Blackwood Railroad network, required 40 craftsmen working for 4 months to complete. French crystal chandeliers, German stained glass, and Indian teak were all transported via Blackwood's railroad lines, with shipping costs that would have bankrupted a less wealthy builder, but which Blackwood simply absorbed through creative accounting that charged the expenses to various subsidiary companies. As was common practice at the time, the construction site operated its own infirmary, staffed by a single doctor who treated everything from crushed fingers to cholera. Dr. Samuel Morrison's journals, donated to the New York Historical Society by his descendants, provide a grim account of the medical challenges. He treated over 1,400 injuries during the construction period, including 200 that he classified as severe or life-threatening. His repeated requests for additional medical staff were denied, with Blackwood reportedly stating that men who cannot work through pain have no place building monuments to American strength. The psychological toll on workers was documented in various contemporary sources. Letters home, preserved in various ethnic historical societies, describe nightmares about being buried in the foundation, fears that the mansion was cursed from its inception, and a pervasive sense that Blackwood viewed workers as less than human. An Italian worker wrote to his wife that the padrone looks at us the way a man looks at his horses, valuable when healthy, worthless when broken. These sentiments were reinforced by Blackwood's practice of having armed Pinkerton guards patrol the construction site, ostensibly for security, but effectively to prevent any labor organization. By the summer of 1892, with the mansion's exterior complete and interior work proceeding rapidly, strange incidents began to occur that would presage the later tragedy. Workers reported tools disappearing and reappearing in different locations, unexplained cold spots in rooms that should have been warm, and the sound of footsteps in completed wings of the mansion where no one was working. A Hungarian carpenter claimed to have seen a figure in old-fashioned dress walking through a solid wall, though his account was dismissed as the result of alcohol consumption. These early reports, documented in construction supervisor James McKenna's daily logs, were systematically ignored or explained away, though McKenna himself would later refuse to enter certain rooms of the mansion after dark. Chapter 4. Golden Years. The official opening of Ravenshollow Mansion on November 15, 1893, Cornelius Blackwood's 51st birthday, marked the apex of Gilded Age excess in America. The inaugural ball drew 500 guests who arrived in 127 private railroad cars, creating a temporary city of luxury on specially laid tracks that Blackwood had constructed specifically for the event. The New York Times society reporter described the scene as a display of wealth that would have amazed the Caesars, while privately, in her personal diary, she wrote that it was vulgar beyond description, a bacchanal of new money desperate to appear old. The guest list represented a careful balance of American industrial royalty and European nobility, the latter attracted by Blackwood's generous travel stipends that essentially amounted to appearance fees. The Vanderbilts, Astors, and Morgans mingled with Count Ferdinand von Habsburg, the Duke of Marlborough, and various Russian princes whose titles were as questionable as their debts were real. Mrs. Caroline Astor, the self-appointed Queen of New York society, attended despite her well-known disdain for Irish Americans, a capitulation to Blackwood's economic power that signaled his final acceptance into the highest echelons of American society. The ball's menu, preserved in the mansion's archives, consisted of 14 courses, including terrapin soup, canvasback duck, Kentucky ham, and Roman punch, accompanied by wines that contemporary accounts valued at $50,000 for the evening alone. The pièce de résistance was a sugar sculpture replica of Raven's Hollow itself, standing 4 feet tall and requiring 8 men to carry into the ballroom. Inside this edible mansion were 500 small gold boxes, each containing a pearl or precious stone, party favors that cost more than most Americans earned in a decade. Entertainment for the evening included the entire New York Philharmonic Orchestra, relocated to Raven's Hollow for the occasion, and a private performance by opera sensation Adelina Patti, who was paid $10,000 for 3 songs. At midnight, Blackwood unveiled his birthday gift to himself, a portrait by John Singer Sargent that depicted him standing in the mansion's great hall, one hand resting on a globe positioned to show his railroad routes across America. The painting, which took 18 months to complete, cost $75,000 and now hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, on loan from the Raven's Hollow Trust. Following the pattern of similar estates, life at Raven's Hollow during its golden years operated on a schedule as rigid as any railroad timetable. The household staff of 85 servants maintained a routine that began at 4:30 a.m. when the kitchen staff started preparing breakfast and continued until well past midnight when the last chamber pots were emptied and the final lamps extinguished. The hierarchy among servants was as strict as any military organization, with the butler, Charles Ashworth, commanding absolute authority below stairs while maintaining perfect deference above. The daily routine of the mansion, as documented in household account books, required staggering resources. The estate consumed 500 pounds of coal daily for heating during winter months, 100 pounds of ice daily for refrigeration during summer, and enough food to feed a small village. The weekly grocery order, delivered by special train car from New York's finest provisioners, typically included 200 pounds of meat, 50 pounds of butter, 500 eggs, and exotic items like pineapples from Hawaii and coffee from Jamaica. The wine cellar, carved from solid bedrock beneath the mansion, held 10,000 bottles valued at over $100,000, including pre-Revolution vintages that Blackwood purchased from impoverished European nobility. Blackwood's wife, Catherine, born Catherine Mackenzie and elevated to society through her marriage, presided over this domestic empire with a combination of iron discipline and nervous anxiety. Contemporary accounts describe her as a woman perpetually aware of her humble origins, compensating through an adherence to etiquette so strict that even established society matrons found it excessive. She required servants to wear different uniforms for different times of day, insisted on fresh flowers in all 147 rooms, daily, regardless of occupancy, and maintained a social secretary whose sole job was to track the intricate rules of calling cards and return visits that governed Gilded Age social interaction. The Blackwood children, Cornelius Jr., Margaret, and Theodore, grew up in this atmosphere of extraordinary privilege and equally extraordinary pressure. Educated by private tutors in a specially constructed schoolroom that replicated an Oxford classroom, they learned Latin, Greek, French, and German, along with the more practical skills of railroad management and social navigation. Cornelius Jr., as the heir apparent, accompanied his father on business trips from age 12, learning what he would later describe in his memoirs as the art of civilized brutality that American business required. Chapter 5. The Price of Splendor. Behind the glittering facade of Raven's Hollow's golden years lay a darker reality that would ultimately culminate in the tragic disappearance of November 1899. The human cost of maintaining such splendor extended far beyond the construction casualties, creating a system of exploitation that operated with clockwork efficiency. The servant class that kept Ravens Hollow functioning existed in what labor historian Patricia Williams has called a state of genteel slavery, bound not by chains, but by economic desperation and social conditioning. The hierarchical structure of the servant quarters operated on principles as rigid as any caste system. At the apex stood Charles Ashworth, the English butler whose annual salary of $1,200 exceeded what most American families earned in 5 years. Below him, the housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, commanded the female staff with what surviving diary entries from a parlor maid describe as tyrannical precision that would shame a Prussian general. The strict segregation between male and female servants extended to separate staircases, dining areas, and even different times for meals, with any fraternization resulting in immediate dismissal without reference, effectively a death sentence for future employment. Contemporary accounts describe working conditions that would appall modern sensibilities, but were typical of Gilded Age mansions. Servants worked 16 to 18-hour days with only 1 half-day off per month. The servants' quarters, located in the mansion's north wing and attic spaces, were unheated in winter and stifling in summer. 8 to 10 servants might share a single room, sleeping in iron beds with straw mattresses that were replaced only annually. The bathroom facilities for the entire servant staff consisted of 3 water closets and 2 bathtubs for 85 people, resulting in hygiene, conditions that contributed to regular outbreaks of influenza and tuberculosis. The 7 servants who would eventually vanish represented a cross-section of this hidden world. Margaret O'Sullivan, the head housemaid, had risen through the ranks over 15 years, starting as a scullery maid at age 14. Her personnel file, discovered during renovation work in 1978, reveals that she had been disciplined 12 times for minor infractions, including taking an unauthorized break to treat a burn from scalding water and being seen speaking to a tradesman without permission. Despite her exemplary work record, her salary never exceeded $15 per month, from which she sent $10 to her widowed mother in Ireland. Thomas Chen, the estate's chief gardener, occupied an unusual position in the servant hierarchy. As one of only 3 Chinese employees on the estate, he faced both the usual servitude and additional racial discrimination. His botanical expertise, particularly in cultivating exotic orchids in Ravens Hollow's greenhouses, made him valuable enough that Blackwood paid him $25 monthly, still a fraction of what white gardeners earned at neighboring estates. Chen's personal effects, discovered after the disappearance, included letters written in Chinese that, when translated decades later, revealed his plans to save enough money to bring his wife and children from Canton, a dream that required another 20 years of service to achieve. The Morrison twins, James and William, had come to Ravens Hollow from the Pennsylvania coal fields, where their father had died in a mine collapse that investigation proved was caused by inadequate safety supports. As footmen, they were required to powder their hair white daily, stand motionless for hours during dinner parties, and maintain perfect silence unless directly addressed. A fellow servant's diary describes them as broken boys playing at being furniture, their spirits crushed by the weight of their livery. The psychological toll of service at Ravens Hollow manifested in various ways. Dr. Morrison's medical records indicate that he treated numerous servants for what he termed nervous exhaustion, prescribing laudanum that many became dependent upon. Suicide attempts, though hushed up to protect the mansion's reputation, occurred at a rate that Dr. Morrison privately noted was alarmingly above what one might expect. Between 1893 and 1899, at least 4 servants attempted to take their own lives, with 2 succeeding, deaths officially listed as accidents to prevent scandal. Archive evidence suggests that the weeks leading up to the disappearance saw an escalation in strange occurrences and staff tensions. Marcus Thompson's diary, discovered in 1943, hidden beneath floorboards in the stable, provides the most detailed contemporary account. He writes of finding dead birds arranged in ritualistic patterns in the rose garden, of horses refusing to enter certain areas of the grounds, and of a pervasive feeling that something watches us from the empty rooms. His entry for November 1, 1899, is particularly chilling. The house itself has developed a hunger. We all feel it. Mrs. O'Sullivan says we must not speak of it, but silence does not make the fear go away. The economic exploitation extended beyond mere wages. Servants were required to purchase their own uniforms from approved suppliers at inflated prices, often going into debt to the estate that bound them further to their positions. Medical care, while provided by Dr. Morrison, was deducted from wages, meaning that injured or ill servants often worked through pain rather than lose income. The estate store, which sold basic necessities to servants, charged prices 20% higher than local shops, but servants were forbidden from leaving the grounds to shop elsewhere without special permission that was rarely granted. As was common practice at the time, female servants faced additional hazards. Several entries in Mrs. Pritchard's personnel logs refer obliquely to situations requiring discretion and unfortunate departures, Victorian euphemisms for sexual assault by male guests and subsequent dismissal of pregnant servants. Sarah Hoffman, the laundress who would vanish, had reportedly complained to Mrs. Pritchard about unwanted advances from a frequent houseguest, a complaint that resulted not in protection, but in a warning about spreading gossip that could damage the house's reputation. The food provided to servants offers another window into their treatment. While the Blackwood family and guests dined on 14-course meals, servants received a monotonous diet of porridge for breakfast, bread and dripping for lunch, and a stew of questionable meat for dinner. Fresh vegetables and fruit, abundant in the estate's gardens and greenhouses, were forbidden to servants. A former kitchen maid's memoir, published in 1934, recalls being beaten for eating a bruised apple that was destined for the compost heap. The irony of servants maintaining luxury they could never enjoy created what contemporary socialist writers described as a perfect microcosm of capitalist exploitation. Eugene Debs, speaking at a labor rally in 1896, specifically cited Ravens Hollow as an example of American feudalism wrapped in silk and powered by stolen labor. Blackwood's response to such criticism was characteristically dismissive. "I provide employment for those who would otherwise starve. Their gratitude should be payment enough beyond their generous wages." Chapter 6. The Inevitable Fall. The night of November 13, 1899, began like any other at Ravens Hollow Mansion. The household ledger, maintained with meticulous detail by Mrs. Pritchard, records that dinner was served at 8 o'clock sharp to Cornelius Blackwood and 12 business associates who had arrived that afternoon to discuss the consolidation of Northeastern Railroad lines. The menu included oysters, Rockefeller, lamb with mint sauce, and a burgundy, from the 1847 vintage that Blackwood reserved for only the most important negotiations. By all accounts, the evening proceeded normally until 11:47 p.m., the precise moment when the great clock in the entrance hall stopped, its hands frozen at a configuration that would never move again, despite repeated attempts at repair. What happened in the next 3 hours remains one of American history's most confounding mysteries. The last confirmed sighting of the 7 servants who would vanish occurred at 11:30 p.m., when the night watchman, Patrick O'Leary, observed Margaret O'Sullivan and Sarah Hoffman carrying linens to the upper floors. His testimony, given under oath to both police investigators and private Pinkerton detectives, never wavered. "I saw them plain as day, going about their duties as always. There was nothing unusual, nothing to suggest." Here, according to court transcripts, O'Leary broke down, unable to continue. The discovery of the disappearance came at 4:45 a.m., when the kitchen staff arrived to begin breakfast preparations. The kitchen was in perfect order, except for one disturbing detail. 7 place settings had been arranged on the servants' dining table, each with a single white rose, flowers that did not grow in the November garden and were not present in the greenhouse inventory. More unsettling still, each plate contained what appeared to be a communion wafer, though no one could explain their origin or meaning. The initial search of the mansion revealed further mysteries. In Margaret O'Sullivan's room, her bed had been turned down as if for sleep, but her nightclothes remained folded in the drawer. Her few possessions, a Bible, a photograph of her mother, a small collection of letters, were arranged on the bed in a perfect circle. Thomas Chen's quarters showed signs of what investigators initially thought was a struggle, with furniture overturned and papers scattered, until closer examination revealed that the disorder followed a pattern, with items positioned to form Chinese characters that a translator later identified as meaning, "the door opens inward." Cornelius Blackwood's reaction to the disappearance revealed a man confronting something beyond his considerable power to control or understand. Witnesses describe him moving through the mansion in what appeared to be a fugue state, repeatedly checking the same rooms and asking the same questions. His private secretary, James Caldwell, later testified that Blackwood spent the entire night of November 14th in his study, writing and destroying letter after letter, occasionally shouting at empty air, "You cannot have them. The deal was not for them." The police investigation, led by Inspector Robert Halloway of the New York State Police, proceeded along conventional lines despite the unconventional circumstances. Following the pattern of similar estates, the first suspicion fell on labor agitation. The late 1890s had seen increased organizing among domestic workers, and the possibility of a coordinated escape to embarrass a prominent capitalist was seriously considered. This theory collapsed when investigation revealed that none of the missing servants had connections to labor organizations, and their few possessions and saved wages remained untouched in their quarters. The Pinkerton detectives, hired at a cost of $1,000 per day, pursued a different theory. They suspected that the servants had discovered something incriminating about Blackwood's business dealings, perhaps evidence of the bribes, stock manipulation, and occasional murder that built his empire, and had been eliminated to ensure their silence. This investigation uncovered numerous criminal acts by Blackwood, but no evidence linking them to the disappearance. The lead detective, Charles Foster, ultimately concluded in his report that whatever befell these 7 souls, it was not the result of conventional human action. As news of the disappearance spread, Ravenshollow became a magnet for spiritualists, mediums, and occultists who claimed to sense a profound disturbance in what they called the ethereal realm. Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society sent a delegation that conducted seances in the mansion's ballroom, during which participants reported contact with entities of great antiquity and terrible purpose. These sessions ended abruptly when medium Helena Carstairs began speaking in what witnesses described as 7 distinct voices simultaneously, each calling for help from the space between walls. Contemporary accounts describe how the disappearance triggered a collapse of the remaining household staff's morale and sanity. Within a week, 20 servants had fled, many leaving their possessions and owed wages behind. Those who remained reported increasingly disturbing phenomena. Shadows that moved independently of their sources, whispered conversations in empty rooms, and the sound of footsteps following them through corridors. The butler, Charles Ashworth, maintained order through sheer force of will until November 28th, when he was found in the wine cellar, having apparently aged 20 years overnight, his hair completely white and his hands shaking uncontrollably. He resigned that day, telling reporters only that there are things in that house that God never intended to walk the earth. The financial impact on Blackwood was immediate and devastating. The scandal, combined with the panic of 1893's lingering effects and new antitrust legislation targeting railroad monopolies, created a perfect storm of ruin. Stock in Blackwood Railways dropped 60% in 2 weeks. Creditors, emboldened by his weakness, called in loans that had been extended on handshake agreements. Business associates distanced themselves, canceling contracts and refusing meetings. The empire that had taken 40 years to build began crumbling in a matter of months. By Christmas 1899, Ravenshollow stood nearly empty. The Blackwood family had relocated to their Manhattan townhouse, leaving only a skeleton staff of 12 to maintain the massive property. These remaining servants, according to payroll records, were paid triple wages as hazard compensation, though even this proved insufficient to retain them. The last entry in the household ledger, dated January 15, 1900, simply states, "The house has won. We surrender." Chapter 7. Transformation. The abandonment of Ravenshollow Mansion as a private residence marked the beginning of its transformation into something else entirely, a symbol, a warning, and eventually a public trust that would attempt to reconcile its dark history with educational purpose. Cornelius Blackwood's death on March 3, 1901, supposedly from a heart attack, though witnesses described symptoms more consistent with profound terror, left the estate in legal limbo that would persist for nearly 2 decades. The immediate aftermath of Blackwood's death revealed the full extent of his financial collapse. Creditors descended upon the estate like vultures, each claiming priority for debts that totaled over $8 million. The mansion itself, valued at $4.7 million when constructed, could find no buyers at any price. The combination of its reputation as cursed ground and the prohibitive maintenance costs, estimated at $400,000 annually, made it a white elephant that even the wealthiest Gilded Age survivors couldn't afford or wouldn't dare to own. During this period of abandonment, from 1901 to 1919, Ravenshollow entered what local historians call the wild years. The skeleton caretaking staff, reduced to just 3 groundskeepers who refused to enter the mansion itself after dark, could not prevent trespassers, vandals, and thrill-seekers from exploring the property. Police reports from the period document dozens of incidents. Would-be treasure hunters convinced that Blackwood had hidden gold in the walls, occultists attempting to commune with the vanished servants, and local teenagers using the abandoned ballroom for illicit gatherings that invariably ended with participants fleeing in terror from unexplained phenomena. Following the pattern of similar estates, the first attempt at rehabilitation came from an unexpected source. In 1919, Dr. Jonathan Marsh, a psychiatrist who had made his fortune treating shell-shocked veterans of World War I, purchased Ravenshollow for $175,000, less than 4% of its construction cost. His plan to convert it into a sanitarium for wealthy mental patients seemed logical given the isolated location and extensive facilities. The renovation, which cost an additional $500,000, included modernizing the plumbing, installing central heating, and converting the servant quarters into patient rooms. The Marsh Sanitarium operated for exactly 13 months. What happened during that period remains partially classified under New York state medical privacy laws, but available records paint a disturbing picture. Patients reported shared hallucinations of 7 figures in servant clothing standing at the foot of their beds. 3 patients committed suicide using identical methods, hanging themselves with bed sheets tied in a specific knot that investigators noted was used in Victorian-era servant quarters for securing heavy laundry. Dr. Marsh himself suffered what colleagues described as a complete psychological break, found one morning in the former servants' dining hall, cataleptonic and clutching 7 white roses that grounds staff swore had not been present the night before. The sanitarium's closure in 1920 led to another period of abandonment until 1925, when the estate was purchased by the Catholic Church with intentions of establishing a seminary. Archbishop Francis Spellman personally blessed the grounds, and extensive renovations began to transform the mansion into dormitories and classrooms. The project was abandoned after only 6 months when construction workers refused to continue following what they described as manifestations incompatible with Christian faith. The specific nature of these manifestations was never officially documented, though workers' letters to their families mention tools moving of their own accord, Latin prayers being answered by voices speaking backward, and the repeated appearance of shadows in the shape of serving uniforms in photographs of the renovation work. The Great Depression brought a practical, if macabre, solution to the Ravens Hollow problem. In 1933, the federal government acquired the property through tax foreclosure and briefly considered converting it to a civilian conservation corps camp. This plan was scrapped when the initial survey team reported that compass needles spun wildly on certain parts of the property and that their radio equipment picked up what they described as transmitted voices speaking in tongues that precede modern language. Instead, the property was simply sealed, with federal marshals posted to prevent trespassing. World War II brought an unexpected chapter in Ravens Hollow's transformation. The Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the CIA, commandeered the estate in 1943 for purposes that remain partially classified. Declassified documents reveal it was used for psychological operations training and enhanced interrogation technique development. What little information has emerged suggests that the OSS was interested in the mansion's reputation and its potential use in breaking enemy agents through fear. The program was terminated after 6 weeks when 3 trainee agents suffered what reports describe as complete dissociative breaks requiring permanent institutionalization. The post-war period saw the first successful transformation of Ravens Hollow, though success must be qualified. In 1952, the newly formed Ravens Hollow Trust, funded by a coalition of historical societies and the guilt-driven donations from descendants of Gilded Age fortunes, acquired the property with the explicit goal of converting it to a museum. The Trust's approach was revolutionary for its time. Rather than hiding the mansion's dark history, they would embrace it, presenting Ravens Hollow as a teaching tool about American inequality, labor exploitation, and the human cost of unbridled capitalism. The conversion process, overseen by historian Dr. Margaret Hamilton, took 8 years and cost $12 million. Every room was meticulously restored to its 1899 appearance, using photographs, household records, and survivor testimonies. The servants' quarters, previously hidden from public view in Gilded Age mansion tours, were given equal prominence to the grand staterooms. Most controversially, the Trust commissioned a memorial to the 7 vanished servants, their names carved in marble in the entrance hall, where visitors could not avoid seeing them. Chapter 8. Voices from the Shadows. The transformation of Ravens Hollow into a museum brought unexpected consequences. The emergence of previously hidden testimonies from those who had lived and worked in the mansion's shadow. As news of the museum project spread, descendants of former servants began coming forward with letters, diaries, and oral histories that had been suppressed for decades by fear, shame, and legal threats from the Blackwood estate. These recovered voices provide the most intimate glimpse into the reality of life at Ravens Hollow and the events leading to the disappearance. Mary Chen, Thomas Chen's daughter, who had been born in San Francisco in 1932, provided the trust with her father's letters that her mother had hidden for 30 years. Written in Chinese and never sent, these letters reveal a man caught between two worlds. In one, dated October 30th, 1899, just 2 weeks before his disappearance, Thomas wrote, "The great house speaks at night in voices that are not human. The other servants pretend not to hear, but I see the fear in their eyes. We are prisoners here, not of walls but of need. My children must never know that their father's hands, which should have cultivated beauty, instead serve the appetite of a demon in human form." The Morrison family of Scranton, Pennsylvania, preserved a collection of photographs that the twins had secretly taken using a camera they had purchased together with 6 months of saved wages. These images, developed only after their disappearance, show the hidden spaces of Ravenshollow. Servants collapsed from exhaustion in corridors, injuries being treated in the kitchen because Dr. Morrison was unavailable, and, most disturbingly, a series of photographs taken in the mansion's sub-basement showing what appears to be ritualistic markings on the walls that match no known symbolic system. Elena Kowalski's fiancé, Stanley Novak, broke 50 years of silence in 1951 to share her final letter, received the day before her disappearance. Her words reveal a young woman torn between hope and foreboding. "My dearest Stanley, we must postpone our wedding. Something is happening here that I cannot explain. Mrs. O'Sullivan says we must stay together, that there is safety in numbers, but I fear we are not protecting ourselves from something outside, but from something already among us. If I do not write again, know that I loved you, and that I fought whatever fate awaits us." Contemporary accounts from local townspeople, collected through oral history projects in the 1960s, paint a picture of a community that both depended on and feared Ravenshollow. James Patterson, who delivered groceries to the estate, recalled, "You could feel it the moment you crossed onto the property, like the air got thicker, harder to breathe. The horses knew it too. They'd get skittish, sometimes refuse to go up the drive at all. The servants, when you saw them, looked hollow, like something was eating them from the inside. But they needed those jobs, and we needed their business, so everyone pretended not to notice." Dr. Morrison's grandson, Dr. Robert Morrison, Jr., donated his grandfather's complete medical records to the trust in 1975, including notes that the elder Morrison had hidden in a false bottom drawer. These records reveal that in the 6 months before the disappearance, he had treated over 40 servants for symptoms he could not medically explain. Sudden aging, hair turning white overnight, paralysis with no physical cause, and what he described as a wasting disease that seems to consume the soul before the body. His final entry, dated November 12, 1899, reads, "I am a man of science, but science has no explanation for what plagues this house. May God forgive me for my silence." The most significant discovery came in 1978 during renovation work, when workers found a hidden cache of documents in a wall cavity of the servants' quarters. Among these was a joint statement, signed by all 7 of the disappeared servants, and dated November 1, 1899. "We, the undersigned, swear before God that what we have witnessed in this house defies natural law. We have seen doors open onto rooms that should not exist. We have heard our employers speaking to entities that cast no shadows. We have cleaned blood from walls only to watch it reappear. We fear for our souls, but we fear more for our families should we speak. If we vanish, let this record show we did not flee. We were taken." Sarah Hoffman's husband, Wilhelm, who spent 30 years searching for his wife, left behind a journal that his great-granddaughter donated to the trust in 1995. His entries document not only his search, but also his encounters with others who had lost family members under mysterious circumstances connected to Gilded Age mansions. He identified a pattern of disappearances, always involving 7 individuals, always occurring during the new moon, always leaving behind the same signs: white roses, communion wafers, and stopped clocks. His research suggested that at least 12 other mansions had experienced similar events, though all had been successfully covered up by wealthy families, with the power to silence investigation. The oral histories collected from descendants reveal the long-lasting trauma these disappearances caused. Families were torn apart by uncertainty, never knowing whether to mourn their lost members or hope for their return. Many suffered social ostracism, as association with the Ravens Hollow disappearances was seen as a curse that might spread. Children of the disappeared were often unable to find work or marry, marked by a tragedy they had no part in creating. Perhaps the most chilling testimony comes from Agnes Pritchard, daughter of the mansion's housekeeper, who was 12 years old at the time of the disappearance. Interviewed in 1962, she recalled, "The night they vanished, I woke to see 7 figures standing in our garden, perfectly still, facing the mansion. They looked like our missing servants, but empty, like their bodies were there, but their souls were somewhere else. I wanted to call out, but my mother's hand covered my mouth. 'They're not ours anymore,' she whispered. 'They belong to the house now.' We left the next morning and never returned." Chapter 9. American Paradox. Ravens Hollow Mansion stands today as a monument to the fundamental paradox at the heart of the American experiment. A nation founded on principles of equality and liberty, built through systematic inequality and bondage. The 7 servants who vanished into the November night of 1899 were not merely victims of a singular tragedy, but representatives of millions whose labor, suffering, and sacrifice constructed the gilded palaces of American prosperity while being denied even the smallest share of its rewards. The mansion's Visiting Scholars Program, established in 1980, has produced numerous studies examining how Ravens Hollow exemplifies broader patterns of American social and economic development. Dr. Elizabeth Crawford's groundbreaking work, Servants of Shadow, Labor and Death in the Gilded Age, uses Ravens Hollow as a lens to examine how the period's unprecedented wealth creation depended on the systematic dehumanization of workers. Her research demonstrates that for every dollar of wealth created during the Gilded Age, approximately 60 cents derived from unpaid or underpaid labor, a transfer of value that Crawford argues constituted the largest theft in human history, dressed in the language of progress and civilization. The preservation of Ravens Hollow raises uncomfortable questions about American memorial culture. As historian James Baldwin observed during his 1963 visit to the mansion, "We preserve the plantations and the palaces, but where are the monuments to those who built them with their blood?" Ravens Hollow at least has the honesty to be haunted. The mansion receives approximately 450,000 visitors annually, generating over $15 million in tourism revenue for the local economy. An irony not lost on labor historians, who note that the site of worker exploitation continues to generate wealth from their suffering. Modern forensic investigation of the disappearance, utilizing technology unavailable to 1899 investigators, has yielded intriguing if inconclusive results. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2003 revealed numerous anomalies beneath the mansion, including what appear to be chambers not shown on any architectural plans. However, attempts to excavate these spaces have been prevented by structural concerns and, according to some workers, by equipment failures that defy explanation. Electromagnetic readings taken throughout the mansion show persistent anomalies in the former servants' quarters, with energy signatures that physicists describe as inconsistent with known phenomena. The digital age has brought new dimensions to the Ravens Hollow mystery. Since 2010, over 3,000 visitors have posted photographs online showing apparent anomalies, figures in servant attire appearing in windows, shadows that don't match the photographers, and most frequently, orbs of light in the exact locations where the 7 servants were last seen. Professional debunkers have examined hundreds of these images, and while able to explain many as artifacts of digital photography or pareidolia, admit that approximately 15% show anomalies that cannot be conventionally explained. The mansion's role in contemporary social justice movements has evolved significantly since the establishment of the museum. The Ravens Hollow Workers Memorial Fund, established in 1995, has provided over $10 million in scholarships to descendants of Gilded Age servants and laborers. The annual November 13th vigil, marking the anniversary of the disappearance, draws thousands of participants who see in the vanished servants a symbol of all workers whose lives and deaths have been erased from official history. Chapter 10. Living Memory. Today, as autumn fog rolls up from the Hudson River and envelops Ravens Hollow Mansion in its ethereal embrace, visitors continue to arrive, drawn by history, mystery, and something ineffable that seems to emanate from the very stones of the structure. The mansion operates as a living museum, its 45 full-time staff members, a number that would have amused and appalled Cornelius Blackwood, dedicated to preserving not just the physical structure, but the memories and lessons it embodies. The morning tours begin at 9 a.m. sharp, with groups of 30 entering through the servants' entrance, a deliberate choice by the Trust to ensure visitors first see the mansion from the perspective of those who labored within its walls. The guided route takes exactly 90 minutes, passing through kitchens where copper pots still hang in rigid formation, servants' quarters with their narrow beds and thin walls, and finally into the opulent spaces where the Blackwood family enacted their performances of wealth and power. The mansion's education programs reach over 50,000 students annually, using Ravens Hollow as a tangible connection to discussions of labor, rights, income inequality, and social justice. The Voices from Below program allows students to spend a night in the restored servants' quarters, experiencing something of the isolation and hardship that defined life for the domestic workers. Many participants report that this single night transforms their understanding of American history more profoundly than years of traditional education. As the sun sets on another day at Ravens Hollow, the last tour group exits through the main entrance, passing beneath the memorial to the 7 who vanished. Their names, Margaret O'Sullivan, Thomas Chen, James Morrison, William Morrison, Sarah Hoffman, Elena Kowalski, and Marcus Thompson, are illuminated by spotlights that will remain on throughout the night, a perpetual vigil for those who disappeared into history's shadows. The mansion stands now in its 131st year, having outlasted its creator, survived abandonment, and transformed from a symbol of oppression into an instrument of education. Yet questions remain. What happened to those 7 souls on that November night? Were they victims of human violence, swept up in something supernatural, or did they somehow escape into a freedom that required them to vanish completely from the historical record? These questions may never be answered, but perhaps that is fitting. Ravens Hollow's true horror lies not in its ghosts, but in its reality, the documented suffering of thousands who labored in bondage to create beauty they could never enjoy. The 7 who vanished have become symbols of all those whose names were never recorded, whose deaths were never investigated, whose humanity was denied by a system that valued wealth over human dignity. The mansion closes to the public at 5 p.m., but Ravens Hollow never truly sleeps. Security cameras record empty rooms where furniture occasionally moves without cause, where lights turn on in sequences that match the servants' morning routine from 1899, where sometimes, just sometimes, 7 shadows can be seen standing in the great hall, facing the portrait of Cornelius Blackwood, as if in eternal judgment. The night security staff, hardened professionals who have worked at the mansion for years, still refuse to patrol certain areas after midnight. They know, as all who work at Ravens Hollow eventually learn, that some houses never release their hold on those who served within their walls, and some mysteries are perhaps better left unsolved.